Disclaimer. I'm not saying it was J.K. Rowling, but it was J.K. Rowling. George acted first. Expelliarmus in carceris! Harry's wand flew to George's hand, and he was bound in ropes where he knelt. Harry snarled and spat at George like a rabid dog, but then he jerked back like he'd been struck. "Stop it! Go away!" he said through clenched teeth. He fell over on his side, struggling against the rope. "Harry!" Ginny ran forward to help him. Harry's eyes flashed red, and he snapped at her, but the next moment he knocked his own head against the ground. "No, stop!" "Harry, what's wrong?" Ginny said. She held his head so he couldn't reach her with his teeth. "Is it him? Did he find out?"
"No," he groaned. "The one in me, I think we woke it up."
"Woke it up?" George said.
"Like with the locket,"
Hermione said hollowly.
"When I killed it, it woke up and tried to stop me."
"So the Horcrux is trying to possess Harry?" he said.
"I think that's obvious," Ginny said. "Harry, fight it!"
He struggled against her embrace.
"Fight it! I know you can do it. You can resist the Imperius Curse. Use your occlumency."
Go away!" Harry growled. Ginny didn't budge, whether or not it was addressed to her. Indeed, she held him tighter, pushed his mouth away with one hand, and kissed him on the forehead.
"Fight him, Harry! Fight him for me!" she pleaded.
Harry's eyes resolved to their normal green, and stayed there. He slumped against Ginny, trembling and sweating. His teeth were still clenched with the strain, but he slowly began to relax. Ginny reached around and began to loosen his bindings.
"No, don't," Harry said. I can hold it off now, but I don't think I can do it in my sleep. It's not like keeping him out with occlumency. It's already inside."
"Then what do we do?"
she said.
"I don't know," he whispered. "Hope it falls asleep again?"
"Hope your mother's protection suppresses it, you mean?" Hermione pointed out. "I assume that's why it never gave you trouble before."
Harry shrugged.
"Yeah, maybe."
"What about the real you-know-who?" Ginny asked. "Can he sense it now it's awake?"
Harry thought for a minute.
"He didn't notice when we woke the locket up, I don't think. He would have looked for us a lot harder if he knew. He wouldn't be wasting his time running the ministry."
"Okay, that's one good thing,"
she said, forcing a smile. "We'll have to watch him," George pointed out. "If he can't fight it off at night, we'll have to keep an eye on him, make sure the Horcrux doesn't try anything. Or, Hermione, can you knock him out with a spell?"
I don't know," she said. "I could put him into an induced coma, but I don't know how that will interact with the possession. If his body is physically incapable of waking up, it might shut down the Horcrux too, or it might let it walk him like a puppet." Can you do the ritual again?" Ginny said. "Change it, make it stronger so it'll work next time?" "It's not that simple. If it's not working now, I don't know if we can make the Horcrux release its hold. I'll try, but it's an even harder problem."
Harry took a deep breath.
"Hermione, if you can't..."
"She will,"
Ginny said. Harry shook his head and nudged her away.
"She's not God, Ginny. If she can't do it, you might not have a choice. I have to sleep sometime, and I don't know if I'll be able to get control back if it fully takes over. You might have to kill me."
"No!" Silence rang in the clearing. Ginny, Hermione, and George had all said it at once.
"You might not have a choice," he repeated.
"But you're the chosen one, Harry," Ginny said. "The prophecy..."
"The prophecy doesn't matter. It's true because you know who believes it's true. If I die, the prophecy's over, and you kill him the same way we were planning. Get the last 2 Horcruxes and take him down."
"I won't let you do this," Ginny said.
Harry smiled sadly and shook his head.
"I know you won't, Ginny."
He looked up and locked eyes with Hermione. She knew what he was telling her. She didn't react, even to nod, but she could tell he knew that she knew. Harry understood the same thing that Ron had at Malfoy Manor. That, of all of them, Hermione was the one who had what it took to do what was necessary. She was the one with the ruthlessness to kill her best friend in order to set him free. That she would put Ginny in a coma to stop her interfering if she had to. That she would walk away from Britain if the Weasleys wouldn't forgive her. She wished she had as much confidence in herself as he did. At the same time, she prayed that it would never, ever come to that.
"I'll do whatever I can," she said. "But you're right, Harry. Whatever we do, we'll have to do it fast."
She went back to her tent and retrieved Ravenclaw's diadem. She took a deep breath and set it on her head, and she immersed herself back into the mathematical maze that was the ritual magic. Day 51. Hermione finally found herself back where she'd been a few nights ago, closed off in her tent with her papers strewn around her with no room to lie down, only stepping outside when she absolutely had to. 2 nights with very little sleep, part of them spent watching Harry, were weighing heavily on her, and she felt no closer to saving him. Harry may have got even less sleep than she had, if it were possible. He had spent most of the past 2 days sitting upright, bound in as comfortable a position as they could manage, never without sunlight or firelight, and more in a half-awake daze than fully conscious or unconscious. It had got him through 2 nights without being fully possessed. There were some incidents, but he fought off the Horcrux each time. But that wouldn't hold out for long. If the last few weeks had taught Hermione anything, it was that he was going to crash and crash hard, and sooner rather than later. As she sat in the tent, Hermione contemplated her red oak wand. The final 1.5 inches of it had turned black like char after this ritual. It didn't appear to be damaged, but the change was worrying. She first noticed it whilst destroying the other Horcruxes, but it was worse now. She'd have to ask Ollivander what was up if she ever saw him again.
"Hello?"
Ginny called, but she didn't wait to come in like George did. Hermione didn't mind. It wasn't like she was likely to see anything at the moment. She sat on the opposite cot.
"Hermione, could I talk to you?"
she asked. Hermione looked up, and Ginny tapped her head. Hermione closed her eyes and took off the diadem. Ginny smiled weakly.
"So, any progress?"
she asked. Hermione shook her head.
"Only the obvious. If we replaced the snake with a human sacrifice, I'm sure it would work. But even if it were a willing sacrifice, I don't see how we could make it into a truly light ritual." "Yeah, that's what I figured too," Ginny said. "How are you doing?"
She motioned to the mess around her.
"Just about how it looks."
Ginny took a deep breath and seemed to work up her nerve.
"You know, Harry and I heard you and George talking the other day."
Hermione nodded slowly.
"I assumed as much. I didn't know it was so hard for you. I've seen you on bad days, but I had no idea it was that bad." "It's not like I advertise it," she said. "I'd rather just be left alone. That's why George had to come in and make me stop and take care of myself. Still, I'm really sorry about pushing you so hard all this time. If I'd known I was hurting you so much, I would have backed off."
"No, you wouldn't." But that didn't matter.
"It's not your fault, Ginny," Hermione told her. "I told you before you couldn't push me as hard as I was pushing myself. I hardly think you could have been annoyed with my distractions as I was, or as frustrated by my lack of progress."
That much, at least, was true.
"I don't know. I was a real bitch to you sometimes because I'm terrified I'm going to lose Harry. That I'm going to lose the man I love. I think I have at least as much right to be worked up about it that you do. I'm just sorry I took it out on you like I did."
Hermione shook her head.
"I did my best to hide the worst of it, Gin," she told her. I don't want this to become a contest of... I don't even know what we're competing over here. My point is, I have my own demons to fight, and you don't bear any blame for that. And frankly, you dealt with yours a lot better than I've done. But you're not the one who had me working myself to death, sleeping 3 hours a night. Like all of us are doing now. When I was up at 3 a.m, fighting with my figures until I was literally tearing my hair out and frothing at the mouth. All that was on me, not you."
Ginny winced.
Crap, how did I not notice that? I was sleeping right next to you. It's because I didn't want you to notice.
Ginny opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. She closed it and stared at her for a minute before speaking this time.
Okay, no competing over how miserable we are. That doesn't help either of us. You don't look like you're doing so now, though.
She waved her off.
Not important. Harry needs all of us more right now. One way or another, it's going to be resolved quickly.
Ginny shuddered.
Yeah, you're right, she said. Just, you try to keep it together, too. Same to you, Ginny, she said.
When neither of them said anything more, Hermione picked up the diadem and put it back on her head. She knew better than to expect her little talk with George to solve all of her problems. Even when she was sleeping properly and working normal hours again, she was sure she would be struggling with them. But for the moment, she stopped worrying about it and dove in headfirst, because she really was on a tight time limit to save Harry's life. It was quite the motivator. Hours later, she felt like she'd got nowhere. She pored over her exorcism ritual again and again. Was there a way to remove a soul fragment that didn't want to go? Would it work if she added elements to counter more parts of the Horcrux ritual? Maybe. She really didn't know, and she didn't have time to figure it out. She needed a quick fix. Something, anything, to modify the ritual she had now to correct the problem. A human sacrifice would do it, but that was crossing the line into dark territory, even if it was a willing one. A stronger act of love might work, but that was getting uncomfortably physical, and to really dot the I's and cross the T's to make it unambiguously light at that point was farther than she, and more importantly Harry and Ginny, was prepared to go. Bringing in an actual priest might possibly help, but again, crucifixes and holy water against a human soul, however maimed, was an uncertain thing. A blood connection between Harry and the snake? That could ease the path to get the Horcrux to move to it, but blood was treacherous to work with ritualistically, and it was edging into dark territory. She sighed to herself.
A lot of possibilities, she muttered. None of them certain enough to try, and there's no time to go further afield. I just don't see how I can make this ritual work unless I had a willing subject.
Hermione gasped. It could be. It couldn't be, could it?
Would that even work? She said. Can you just take a soul out and put it back in? That seems wrong.
Her eyes grew even wider.
But if I'm right about Dementors, you can. Can't use an actual Dementor, but power of love, having a body to go back to, that could work. That could really work.
Her eyes darted around. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her notes and started drawing, rearranging the diagrams.
2 rituals, not 1. The first one I should be able to do just by flipping a couple signs. It's the same principle. Oh, but will Magricia Cadavra work? Yes, it's not naturally bound. I don't need to work out if it works on natural life. It's the second one that'll be tricky. It's not about light and dark there. That'll be from light to light. Okay, Milk of Human Kindness I can repurpose. Patronus as guide instead of guardian? Patronus means protector, though. What about binding? What if I connect... No, that's back to the previous problem, but Harry's been bound for his own protection for 2 days. We'll be 3 days. Loosing that binding could have a place. Well, duh, she corrected herself. Patronus is protector of the soul, keeping it from being removed by a dark force. That works. And True Love's Kiss becomes Breath of Life, obviously. I'll have to rearrange the runes and the geometry, but this could work. She took her idea to Harry, still tied to a chair, Ginny, and George. Hermione sat across from them and tried her best to keep her explanation coherent in her sleep-deprived state. Okay, I found a solution, she said. You're going to think I'm crazy, but it'll work. It'll work better than anything else I've come up with, anyway.
All right, we're listening, Harry said.
You know whose soul fragment is holding on to Harry too tight to dislodge, she said. I don't know if it's his willpower or residual effects from the original Horcrux ritual or something else, but it won't come out. So, we turn the ritual around. With some minor changes, it'll work. with a willing subject. We pull Harry's soul out of his body and put it into Ginny."
Hermione braced herself for the inevitable explosion, but Ginny was just staring at her like a deer in headlights, and George was opening and closing his mouth, more confused than anything.
"No!" Harry shouted so loudly that she checked his eyes for red flickering. "No way! I'm not putting Ginny at that kind of risk. You know what possession did to Quirrell."
"I'm not finished yet, Harry," she said. "And yes, I know what it did to Quirrell. Over months. I'm talking minutes. We move your soul into Ginny. That leaves only you-know-who's fragment in your body. Your body will just be a Horcrux then. Less than a Horcrux, even. I can remove the fragment the same way as the others. Then we do the ritual again to put your soul back in your body, and you'll be clean."
Harry stared at her silently. Then he started laughing, but it wasn't him laughing. His eyes flickered red, and he hissed,
"Foolish mudblood! You'll only kill them both! You are toying with forces about which you know nothing!"
Hermione wasn't sure what made her do it.
"Shut up, Tom!" she snapped. "I'm smarter than you, and you know it."
Harry flinched, and then he was back.
Sorry about that," he said breathlessly. "It's getting worse."
"Then we'll have to do it tomorrow," Hermione said. "I'll have to go see Fleur again. We'll need 2 feedings of breast milk to pull it off this time."
"Now, hold on," George protested. "Don't we all have to agree to this? I'm not letting you put my baby sister in that kind of danger either."
"Oh, like you can stop me," Ginny said. "It will be a risk, Ginny," Hermione cut in. "He's right about that, and it'll be your life and your sanity that's at risk as much as Harry's." "I don't care," Ginny said defiantly. "This is the only way to save Harry, isn't it? The only way to stop you-know-who?" "There are lots of ways to stop you-know-who," Hermione said. "The only one that leaves Harry alive, then?"
She nodded and answered calmly.
"It is the most likely way, yes."
"Ginny, no," Harry said. "I'm not letting you do this."
"You're tied to a chair, Harry. You can't stop me either."
"I'm not going to lose you like this."
"And you think I don't feel the same way?" she screamed. "You're the one who's being possessed. You're the one who's going to die if Hermione's plan doesn't work. I've been possessed before, remember? I know what it's like. You saved my life when we barely knew each other. You, Hermione, Ron, and Professor Vector. Nearly got yourself killed, too, as I recall. Now it's you, and it's my turn to return the favor, no matter how dangerous it is. I love you, Harry Potter, and I'm not going to lose you without giving everything I can to save you."
Harry stared at her, then lowered his head.
"Damn it, I can't stop you, can I?" he grumbled.
"Nope. What about you, George? Are you going to try and stop me?" "Ginny, we still need a 4th person to complete the ritual," Hermione cautioned, but she also turned to her boyfriend. "George, I won't pretend this isn't dangerous," she said. "But trust me when I say that I wouldn't be suggesting this if I had any better options."
George sighed and looked between the two of them.
"I do trust you, Hermione," he said. "And I admit I probably wouldn't do this if I thought I could convince Ginny otherwise. But of course I'll help with the ritual."
Ginny nodded firmly.
"We're all agreed, then."
Hermione looked at each of them in turn.
"So be it," she said. "I'll have to get ready, then. I need to make some infant formula to give to Fleur and work out the rest of the geometry."
Hermione slid the jar of chemically assembled infant formula across the table to Fleur. Fleur had reluctantly sent Molly and Nadia out of the room again, and had even more reluctantly consented to cast an imperturbable charm on the door so they couldn't be overheard. But once Hermione explained her plan, she was glad she did.
"So let me understand completely," Fleur said. "You mean to remove Harry's soul from his body and put it into Ginny for safekeeping?" "Yes." "But how can you do this? His soul would just pass on if you remove it." "The Horcrux ritual lets you cast off bits of soul without losing them." "Yes, with extremely dark magic." "With extremely powerful magic," Hermione said. "Dumbledore said love is the most powerful form of magic, and considering it nearly worked the first time, I'm inclined to agree. Of course, sacrificial love is one thing, but this? Ginny's putting her life on the line too for this, and it's the complete package that really does it. The runes, the Patronus charm, the fact that Harry will have a body to go back to, and the bonds of love. The bonds of love? Fleur said in confusion, but then her eyebrows shot up. Do you mean, but Harry and Ginny can't be married? They are too young. You can get married at 16 in Scotland, Hermione said flatly. But that's my plan C. I haven't told them that bit yet. If you know fairy stories, you'll know that true love works fine before the wedding. It worked in the first ritual. You said that ritual failed, Fleur exclaimed. That ritual did exactly what it was supposed to. The soul fragment was just stronger than I anticipated. It'll work. Fleur huffed and crossed her arms, staring at her for a minute. And you can expel the Horcrux from Mary's body, she said. That's the easy part. And put his soul back when you are finished? That's the hardest part, naturally, but I'm confident in what I've got. Fleur sighed. Very well. If you are all agreed, I will not stop you. She picked up the jar of powdered formula Hermione had brought. This formula is safe, yes? There's certainly nothing harmful in it, Hermione said. I controlled everything that went into it, and it's formulated specifically for infant nutrition. Just add water and bottle feed as normal. Even if it's not as good as off the shelf, it'll be fine to use for a day. Fine. Then I will help you again. You can come back for the milk in the morning. Thank you, Fleur. Hermione stood up to go. And Hermione? Fleur stopped her. Yes? Good luck. Thanks. We'll need it.
Day 52. So, on a scale of 1 to whatever it is you did to Umbridge, how horrifying is this going to be? George said. Hermione looked over the rune setup one last time.
I'd say somewhere between Inferus and what Filch and Mrs. Norris get up to in their spare time, she replied. Oh, Merlin's balls! Ginny cried. I did not need to hear that.
Me neither, George said. He pointed at her dramatically. I've corrupted you! Hermione chuckled darkly.
But seriously, I'm expecting gruesome threats of torture and death with a healthy side of blasphemous oaths if we let the fragment go on long enough, which I'm hoping not to.
That goes double for me, Harry said. Instead of standing, Harry was tied to a chair in the center of one of the circles. There were 2 circles now, since the 2 rituals required different runes, and they wouldn't have time to set them up. They overlapped so that the edge of one fell on the center of the other, and Ginny and Harry were at the 2 centers. The first circle was similar to the original exorcism layout. The adder tied around a tree branch was still there, though it was an anchor rather than a receptacle. Hermione and George were moved to different places slightly behind Harry to direct their spells in the opposite direction, and the runes were a bit changed. Once they were all in place, Hermione began the same as before.
Legate scripta!
The runes of both circles came to life.
With the serpent lifted up, we bind the corruption, that it will not spread.
She drove the stake into the ground, and the adder hissed as the red cord formed again. She took her spot on the circle and motioned to George. Expecto Patronum! He cast, and the silvery jackal appeared. With the power of a spirit guardian, we divide light from darkness. With the power of a spirit guardian, we protect the passage of the light. 2 white cords connected the jackal to Harry from above. Patronuses could be multiplied, so it was possible for it to do double duty. The black mist formed around him and pulled backwards, but already Harry's own scarlet and gold aura pushed forward toward Ginny. He was still well in control. That was a good sign. Ginny stepped forward with the first silver goblet.
With the milk of human kindness, we divide life from death.
She tipped it into Harry's mouth, since his hands were still tied. He drank it, and his aura pushed farther still. The black and green cord linking him to the soul fragment began to show. Ginny leaned forward, placing her head fully within Harry's aura.
With true love's kiss, we divide love from hate.
She kissed him on the lips, then pulled back, holding him by the hands. The golden cord formed between them. Now it was just up to Hermione. She aimed her wand and chanted.
Se elerutha nome apotis elicitis so, se elerutha nome apotis elicitis so, se elerutha nome apotis elicitis so.
There was an intense pressure in the air as the energy built to a peak, and then, all at once, it snapped. There was a blinding flash and a scream, and when the dust cleared, the runes had deactivated themselves, and Ginny was knocked flat on her back in the center of the circle.
Ginny!
Hermione and George cried at the same time. They ran to her, and with coaxing she opened her eyes.
Ah!
Ginny, what's wrong? Said George.
My head's gonna crack open. It's a side effect of the ritual, Hermione said quickly. You'll be okay long enough to finish it. Ginny, did it work? Is Harry in there?
Ginny's bright brown eyes flickered to a glowing emerald green, and her voice took on a different tone.
I'm here, her voice said in a different tone. I'm here, Hermione. It worked. Oh, thank God, she sighed. It hurts. It hurts, Ginny's normal voice came back. It's like my worst headache from you-know-who, Harry said. You're trying to fit 2 souls in a body designed for 1, Hermione said. You should be fine as long as you don't lose consciousness.
Suddenly, there was an evil, high-pitched laugh coming from behind her. Hermione and George spun to see Harry's body struggling against his bonds in the chair. His eyes glowed bright red, and he laughed mockingly at them.
You have failed, mudblood,
the Horcrux hissed, with no natural life in it.
They cannot live like this. They will both die.
Hermione stood and pointed her red oak wand between Harry's eyes.
You'll die first. You will die, mudblood, Harry's body snarled. My true self will learn of what you've done and kill you slowly in every way he knows you fear, for he always knows. I have seen your heart, Hermione Granger, and... That didn't work last time, she spoke to him. She summoned up all of her rage and hatred toward you-know-who, trying to block out Harry's face and focus only on those wicked red eyes, and cast... Magrisha Cadavra! The dark green spell struck true, and Harry's body let out an unearthly scream, a long, ragged thing that must have left his voice hoarse. His eyes went dark, and a black ooze and blood sprayed out of his scar. The ooze turned to mist and rose into the air, and with a final shriek that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it evaporated away. Harry's body slumped in the chair. Hermione staggered, winded from the effort, but she had to check one thing. Atma Prakata! Nothing. He was lifeless. An impossibility. A living body with no soul. Finally, it was gone. She nearly dropped to her knees, but she knew she had to press on. Hurry, she gasped. We have to finish it before his body stops breathing. George, help me with the chair. Together, the two of them levitated the chair into the center of Ginny's circle so that she stood right in front of Harry's limp body. Hermione and George took their places. For this one, she'd used a pentagram, specifically in its aspect as the symbol of Venus. They stood about 5 degrees farther back than the last one, at the corners. Legate scripta, she said, and the runes lit up. She pointed at George, and he cast his Patronus again, speaking faster. Expecto Patronum. With the power of a spirit guardian, we protect the passage of the light and bind it to the earth. Ginny struggled even harder to stand than Hermione did. For a moment, Hermione was terrified she was going to spill the milk, which would have killed both of them, maybe all 4 of them if it reacted with the runes. But she held it high and said, With the milk of human kindness, we add life to life. And she drank it herself. This time, Hermione went next. With the breaking of bindings, we set the captive free. Then she used a non-verbal spell that cut the ropes away from Harry's body. Ginny straddled him at once to keep him from falling out of the chair. Ginny was shaking. Short of breath, she still spoke true. With the breath of life, we return life and love to its home. Then took a deep breath,
kissed Harry on the lips, and breathed air into his lungs. A golden aura surrounded the pair. The cord must be there, though it was harder to see. Hermione spoke the next line.
Anasta elfa, otu ido o chinmon perelthin.
She waited this time, though, for Ginny to give Harry another breath.
Otu ido o chinmon perelthin.
She waited again and spoke one more time.
Anasta elfe, itu ido o chinmon perelthin.
There was another flash and a loud crash. Hermione screamed as something sharp and scratchy hit her in the face, and she heard a pair of grunts as two bodies hit the ground. When the light faded and the runes also deactivated, she saw that the chair had exploded into splinters. Harry was lying flat on his back with Ginny on top of him. And then he opened his eyes and gasped loudly for breath. Hermione smiled and cried tears of joy as she finally let herself sink to her knees.
"Breathe the free air once again,"
she whispered. Harry opened his eyes and gasped for breath. The pain was finally gone. Being thrown out of his body was the second most painful thing he'd ever experienced. The most painful thing would always be the Cruciatus Curse, but there was something more to this. The overwhelming sense of horror looming over him as he was taken away from his natural place. It was even worse when he saw his body through Ginny's eyes spouting threats and insults against them, and Hermione expelling the Horcrux from it. Being in Ginny's body was too alien for him to process. It wasn't like taking polyjuice. It was like being jammed inside a puppet that was too small for him on top of being in an unfamiliar body. It wasn't too small because Ginny's body was smaller than his. It was because she was already using it. He felt a pain in his head, her head, that was like the worst of his encounters with you-know-who, but this time it radiated out all over her body. Even though she had invited him in, it was like every part of her was rejecting him just because two souls were not meant to occupy the same space like that. And then it was over, and he heard Hermione speak. He was back in his own body. He felt weak and nearly ready to faint since he hadn't been breathing properly for a few minutes, but he was home. And, Hermione said, Horcrux-free. Ginny was lying on top of him, breathing hard.
"Harry?"
she breathed.
"Yeah, I'm here," he said.
"It worked?"
He smiled.
"It worked. It's gone."
Ginny pushed herself up, brushing her cheek against his, and Harry felt his face grow hot. He became aware of how close they were, with her lying on top of him. They hadn't been this close since a few stolen moments at Pruitt Manor before they went to the factory, he thought. There certainly wasn't enough privacy here in the wilderness.
"You lovebirds okay there?"
George said. They both turned to look at him, blushing harder. George was helping Hermione to her feet.
"Yeah, we're good,"
Harry said. They should probably get up, though. He turned back to Ginny and his breath caught.
"Harry, what?"
she started, and when they locked eyes, that was when a jolt of pain shot through his head, and Ginny screamed.
"Harry!"
"Ginny!
"What's wrong?"
Ginny winced and dropped her head to his, and the flash of pain vanished as quickly as it appeared. Hermione was there beside him, and she turned Ginny over to look at him.
"Harry, what happened?" she said. "Where did it hurt?"
"Ginny," he said. "Look." He reached across to trace his finger across Ginny's forehead, and Hermione and George gasped. There, just above her right eye, was a thin red scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. Ginny reached up and traced the same spot with her fingers, and her eyes grew to the size of saucers.
"What?" she gasped. "Is that—"
"Yeah," George said. "But how? Hermione, you said the Horcrux was gone. Did you, I don't know, split it by accident?"
"I couldn't have," she protested. "I checked Harry's body and it was gone."
"Send a piece of it along with Harry, then?"
"A tiny piece of what was already a fragment? I doubt it, but I can check."
She drew her wand and waved it over Harry and Ginny.
"Atma Prakata."
When she saw the results, she turned pale and let out a tiny
"Oh!"
of surprise. "What is it?" Harry said. He turned to look at Ginny, but she had the same idea. When their eyes met, he felt the same stab of pain and squeezed his eyes shut. When he chanced opening them again, he did his best to avoid Ginny's eyes and look at her scar instead, terrified he'd see the same black mass he'd seen in the mirror. But he didn't. Ginny's aura was the color of an open flame, a swirl of yellow and orange, shot through just a bit with a dark green. But on her forehead, in the same place he had once seen a jagged, black shard in his own head, there was indeed a spectral scar reaching into her hairline and nearly down to her eye. But it wasn't black. It was scarlet and gold.
"Oh no," Hermione said. "Oh no, 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 no. How? That's impossible. No, 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 this is wrong."
"Hermione," Harry and Ginny said in unison, but Harry asked her the question. "What's wrong? What happened?"
I don't know how, but the ritual, it didn't cut cleanly."
"Huh?"
"You've each had a piece of your souls left behind in each other," she cried. "You're Horcruxed to each other." She dropped her wand on the ground. I need to go." She turned and ran off into the woods.
"Hermione!" Harry called after her, but she was already gone. Hermione raced through the trees, blindly trying to escape the horror that seemed to be dogging her steps. She stumbled along, half tripping over roots, until she finally collapsed against a large trunk and screamed and clawed at her head, trying to make the images go away. Harry with a shard of Ginny's yellow-orange aura embedded in his scar where the Horcrux had been. Ginny with a shard of Harry's red and gold aura embedded in herself. The feeling of deep wrongness that surrounded them. There was a reason soul magic was so dark. It felt wrong just to look at them like that. It wasn't long before she felt a hand grab her roughly by the shoulder. She slapped it away hard and reached for her other wand. It grabbed her again by the time she did, and pulled her up to see George's face. "Hermione, stop! You don't just drop your wand and run off," he scolded. "Even if you've got a second one." He held out her red oak wand to her. It was half black now. She didn't take it. She shook her head and fought back tears.
I can't do this, George," she said. "Every time I try to help, it goes all wrong."
"It does not," he said.
"It does! Moody died, Oliver and Mr. Clark died, Bill and Muriel died, the first ritual nearly killed Harry, and now this."
"The ritual worked."
"It didn't."
George frowned. "It got rid of the Horcrux, didn't it?"
"Yes, but at what cost?"
"Isn't this worth it?" Hermione said nothing, but her mood only grew darker. She felt a twisting sensation in the pit of her stomach, a hollow feeling in her chest. "Come on, Harry and Ginny need you." She shook her head.
"I'll only make it worse."
"You will not. And besides, you're still the only person who knows what the hell is going on." That didn't make her feel any better, just more guilt to carry. Still, she took her wand back and allowed him to lead her back to the clearing. Harry and Ginny were both sitting up when they returned, not looking at each other. They were both rubbing their heads right over their scars, and their headaches looked like they were getting worse until Ginny whined and reached out behind her with her hand.
"Harry,"
she said. She flailed a bit until Harry caught her hand and pulled them closer together. Then they both relaxed and looked up at her. Hermione didn't meet their gazes.
"I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." "Hermione, we want to understand," Ginny pleaded. "Why does it hurt like that?"
Hermione shook her head.
I barely understand what happened. The same reason Harry hurt around you-know-who, if I had to take a guess."
"But you-know-who's evil," Harry protested. "Ginny's not. How could she be hurting me? I mean..."
He glanced at Ginny and trailed off.
"Something to do with souls, I imagine," Hermione said. "Will it go away?" said Ginny.
"It got better with you-know-who," Harry said. "It can't be worse than that."
"Damn it, this is all my fault!" Hermione snapped. "I should have never tried that first ritual. I should have found a better way."
"You couldn't have known it would go like that, Hermione," said Harry.
I should have figured out something would go wrong. It always does. I've got to fix this.
She went back to her tent and started gathering up her notes. "Hermione!" George called after her.
I've got to fix this, but I don't know if I can as much as I've bollocksed it up.
"Hermione!" George grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her back again. "You have to stop running off like that. You need to calm down and have a rational discussion."
What is there to discuss? I horcruxed my best friends. Isn't it worth it, though?
Ginny said. Hermione started to protest, but she pressed on.
We finally saved Harry. We got you-know-who out of him. You finished the job Dumbledore gave you. You've done it, and now we can finish him. But I mutilated you,
she cried. Didn't they understand how monstrous tearing the soul was? Couldn't they feel the visceral wrongness in their auras?
Don't you see? The soul isn't meant to be divided like that. It's a crime against nature itself. What I did is as bad as you-know-who making the Horcruxes in the first place. Worse, because I did it to someone else without their consent. I've become him.
Hermione, that's rubbish. She was surprised that it was not Ginny, but Harry who stood up and said it, and she finally looked him in the eyes. You're nothing like you-know-who. You didn't murder anybody. You didn't carve runes into your flesh, a desecrated corpse, or whatever the other horrible things are that you won't tell me. And you sure as hell didn't plan to do this. At worst, this is an accident.
An accident with unspeakable consequences,
she said. It's not the same thing, he insisted.
Isn't it? Didn't you feel the dark magic when I used the spell?
Harry stared at her, perplexed. I saw it and felt it, he said, but it wasn't dark magic, and it was nothing like a Horcrux.
But...
He's right, George agreed. There was something, uncomfortable about it, but it wasn't evil like the other one. But, she tried again, but she knew he was right. The aura of you-know-who's Horcrux had felt gangrenous. That was the word she'd put to the revolting sensation it evoked. Harry's and Ginny's souls weren't like that. Their fragments were broken, even traumatized, but in a strange way, healthy. Sleep deprivation, how steeped she was in dark magic, and the sheer impossibility of the fact had blown it completely out of proportion in her mind. There was a sense of wrongness there, but when she thought about it, it wasn't disgust, it was... indecency. Not the sexual sense, not even in the moral sense, but in the sense that it was something so intimate that it ought to stay hidden behind closed doors, even with close friends. It was like walking in on your parents, or at least she assumed that was what it felt like. Hermione had been lucky enough to dodge that particular bullet, but she still flushed magenta when she identified the feeling. That's... she stammered. Still kinda weird, but not evil, George offered.
How, though? A light Horcrux powered by...
Love, Harry said. He chuckled and reached out to Ginny, helping her up. What is it you've been saying for days now? Love is the most powerful magic there is. I was skeptical when Dumbledore said it, but seeing what just a kiss can do today, I believe it. Maybe the ritual didn't go wrong at all. Maybe this happened because love is the one thing it couldn't cut apart. Hermione tilted her head and stared at her friend.
Are you sure you're still Harry?
She said.
That was too cheesy to be Harry.
Harry laughed, louder this time. So did Ginny and George. But he answered her. Maybe, but I know I love Ginny, and if getting you-know-who out of my head means being connected to her, I'm okay with that.